Hello, Joe, and welcome to the podcast.
Hiya. Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. We're going to talk about your line of work, which I've always been fascinated by, which is forensics. But before we do that, I'm going to discuss, well, basically, can you just say who you are and basically what you do and and a brief summary of a journey you got to get to where you are?
My name's Jo Ward. I'm a crime scene coordinator and I work for West Midlands Police. I've been working for West Midlands Police for 27 years now. 25 of those have been in the forensic department, and 2 years as an inquiry officer. So back in 1997, I actually joined as an inquiry officer. And then 2 years later, I decided to change my role and become a crime scene investigator. And then over the years, I've just worked myself through kind of doing extra courses, and now I'm a crime scene coordinator. So on a day-to-day basis, I attend murder scenes, serious assaults, attempt murders, anything really of seriousness really. So yeah, it's really good. Still love the job, even though I've been doing it 27 years. Every day is so different.
Very cool. I should have said at the start, actually, the reason we have you on is because you've written a new book about your journey. Every contact leaves a trace, which is rather apt for forensics. And it's a very interesting read, both in terms of what you do and how it's affected you personally. But what was it that made you decide to become a CSI?
So when I was at school, I always wanted to be a PE teacher because I've been very much into my sports. And then I did my A levels and then finished those and kind of got fed up with studying really. So decided just wanted to earn some money. So I went and worked for a insurance company. Did that for a couple of years, but I knew that wasn't kind of what I wanted to do forever. So then my dad saw a position advertised for the police, as an inquiry officer. So pretty much like a triage for the police station. So I thought, well, if I can get my foot in the door, I can kind of, there's lots of jobs within the police that I could move around. So I applied and thankfully I got the job. And back then I was really, really quite shy, and kind of just working in that environment made me kind of more confident. I had to kind of stand up for myself a little bit with the kind of clientele that I was dealing with. And then I had the confidence a couple of years later when a job came up, that was advertised for a crime scene investigator. I quite liked the idea, quite fancied the role, because I'd obviously been talking to a lot of the staff that used to pop up into the front office. So I knew a little bit about the role. And it kind of went from there really. So I had a really supportive inspector who helped me with the process, did all the application forms, did some mock interviews, and even went and seen a post-mortem, because that was one of the things that I was frightened of, is that I'd never seen a dead body before. So I was applying for a job where I knew I'd have to deal with dead people. So I needed to make sure that I'd got the stomach for it really. So that was even before the interview. And I just find, just the first post-mortem I went to, it's just fascinating. The human body is fascinating and how everything fits in. So that's kind of my story. So it's not something I've ever dreamed of ever since I've been at school. But absolutely love it. It's the best career.
It seems a very fascinating job, but when you describe it in the book as how you came about, I remember thinking, oh, I thought it'd be a bit more qualified than this. Is that the case now, or is it kind of a similar path that people can take in order to start to be a CSI?
No, I think when I obviously joined, 25 years ago, it was slightly different. So, kind of had my GCSEs and obviously my A levels, which included English, maths, and science. But what we're finding now is, I think it's with the TV programs, the career is becoming more popular. So a lot of school leavers are kind of going on doing their A levels and then doing like forensic degrees, because it's a job that they really want to go into. So when we advertise for a forensic scene investigator, we get hundreds of applicants, and a lot of those do have degrees. It's not an essential that you have to have a degree, but it's a desirable. But obviously, a lot of people are going that kind of route now, or people will get a job within the police force and then move around while they're in. So, once you've got the footing in the door, you can kind of move around a little bit more.
I mean, you say there about degrees not being essential, but again, reading your book, it seems that one thing that is essential is intuition when you go into a crime scene in terms of knowing where everything, see if there's anything out of place. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, the biggest thing is attention to detail. And a lot of it is common sense, to be fair. And it's also thinking outside the box. Um, this is why I love the job so much, because even though you taught the basics of, obviously forensics with regards to evidence types, such as DNA, fingerprints, and footwear, and that's obviously what you're going into scene to look for. You'll always have cases where you're kind of still scratching your head, thinking, what's actually happened here, because it's not as straightforward as you think. And it is about kind of taking things in. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle when you go into the scene, and trying to put it all the kind of pieces back together to find out what's happened, and and this is where it's a bit, you know, um, quite hard on your own kind of mental health, is that you have to kind of put yourself in the victim's shoes. So you have to kind of relive their last moments, to kind of work out exactly what's happened. Um, but yeah, a lot of it is attention to detail and just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit.
Can you remember the first case you worked on as a CSI and what did it entail?
So when I first started off, I obviously, just after I'd actually done my initial course, which was a 9-week course in Durham, obviously I was allowed to just go out to kind of burglary scenes, which was what we class as volume crime. So I went to a lot of burglaries where that broke in via the point of entry was a window, and they'd searched and stolen jewellery or electrical items. So those were the kind of jobs I was going out first. And then when I then kind of extended to going out to sexual assaults such as rapes, vehicle crime, where we examined vehicles that had been stolen and recovered. And then when I got my crime scene manager's role, which was I think 4 or 5 years into my like 4 or 5 years after I joined, I then was able to deal with murder scenes, and I kind of worked my way up really to obviously management level. So pretty much a crime scene manager is where you go out, a bit like a crime scene coordinator, is that you go out and you manage those crime scenes, and obviously formulate forensic strategies with the scene investigating officer.
Yeah, it seems, I mean, I remember, I know this is slightly different because what I'm going to talk about, but I remember watching Quincy when I was younger, which is showing my age a little bit, and then obviously CSI, and especially with police dramas now, they seem to have that forensic element to them, crime dramas. Has that affected how you do your work in terms of are the criminals becoming more savvy in regards to forensics?
No, I mean it's always been that obviously a lot of people that commit crime, such as burglaries, they know to wear, they know to put a pair of gloves on, because if they're on file, as in if we've got their fingerprints on file, they know that if they don't wear gloves, we'll obviously recover their fingerprints from the scene, and they'll get arrested for it. So a lot of that's kind of years and years when I joined, a lot of burglars wear gloves, but I think with the kind of development of DNA, and how sensitive it has become, um, I think we're kind of one step ahead really, because it's become that sensitive that we can get profiles of things that even if you, like as I'm talking now, I'm kind of on my laptop, I'll be spreading or putting DNA on the laptop as I'm touching it. I'll be transferring DNA onto it. So I think we're kind of with the advancements of DNA, and I think in the future it'll carry on with the advances really. So I don't think it's really affected. I think there's always there's different elements of the forensics. Certainly digital has come in a lot more now, as well as CCTV plays a real good part, or a major part, in the forensic investigation as well.
You talked there about earlier about mental health, and there's a quite a section in the book where you talk about your own mental health and something from PTSD. How do you? Because to me, something like that, as much as a job would fascinate me, it's something that it's just a detachment because similar to what you say in the book, there's certain, you know the story, you kind of know the story behind certain crime scenes. How did you detach yourself from that? Because that must be very difficult.
Yeah, it's very hard. And what I found is when I first joined, I found it easier to detach myself from the crime scenes. A massive difference was when I had children, and I became a lot more what I felt was sensitive towards things, and I used to cry more than usual. Um, and then obviously when the period of time, what, probably about 18 years ago now, when I had my post-traumatic stress, which was from a murder scene that I dealt with, I've kind of learned a lot from that really, and I take a lot of positives from that real kind of dark patch in my life, because now the way I look at it is that I go to crime scenes, horrendous murder scenes sometimes, and the way I look at it is that I can't change what's happened. This person's had the most horrific thing happen to them, and they've been murdered in the most brutal way. I can't change that, but what I can do is that I can try and get justice for them and their families, and that's what really drives me, and that's what I focus on. And what I've also learned is not to take all the environment in. So when I had my post-traumatic stress, the mistake I made was looking around at all the family photographs of it was a lady that was murdered by her ex-partner who was the dad of the children. So they're all thinking, they've got no mom, their dad's going to go to prison, they've got no dad. And I started having all those kind of thoughts and looking around at the photos on the wall. And that's one mistake that I did, because you can't afford to do that. You can't get involved. You just have to focus on, the task in hand really. And that's about, getting justice for the victim and their families.
Is it a 24/7 job in the sense of you could literally get a call now and they say, "What? There's a crime's happened. We need you down at this particular area," because obviously you want to preserve the crime scene as quickly as possible.
No, it's obviously we all work shifts, so there's always someone covering that 24-hour period. So I kind of work 3 earlys, 3 lates, and then 3 days off. But on those 3 lates, I may be on call one of those nights. So when I finish work on a late shift from 11 o'clock until 7 o'clock in the morning, I'll be on call. So we kind of cover our nights with on calls, but during the day and obviously late up until 11 o'clock, there's always someone on duty. So if anything comes in, then whoever on duty will get called to it.
Yeah, I just in awe because it just seems such a fascinating job, but also such a tiring job. Is there like a limit in terms of how many people stay in CSI before actually retiring? Because I know with other parts of law that's the case. Is that the same with crime scene investigators?
Yeah, you tend to find, although it's changing slightly, I found over the years, but certainly when I joined, it was really hard. There wasn't a lot of vacancies. I was very lucky when I joined because they were support staff, and there were police officers still in the role at the time, and they decided to completely civilianise the post. So that's why a few jobs were advertised, and I kind of applied at that time. So I was quite lucky, but it used to be, years and years before a position came up, because it was basically when you joined as a forensic scene investigator, that was your kind of career until you retire. What I have found kind of over the years is that pattern's changing, where people will come in and perhaps it's not for them, and because it does come across as very glamorous on the TV, especially with the American CSI programs, and it's really not like that. It's a lot more gruesome than what they portray. So I think sometimes people do come in and into the field, and they're obviously got this preconception of, like, it's going to be all glamorous, and it's not for them, and that's fair enough, because it's not for everyone. And I think you have got to be a certain type of person to be able to do the job. You certainly got to have the stomach for it, and you have got to be able to detach yourself, which again can prove quite hard. So I think that it is changing, where people come in and perhaps only do it for a few years, and I think because of the reductions in staff wise as well, there's fewer of us, so we kind of have to deal with more murders, more suspicious deaths, more post-mortems. So you kind of you've been exposed to that kind of trauma on a regular basis, more than years ago when I first started. So again, it's people are kind of looking after their own mental health and kind of reaching a point where they're thinking enough's enough. So I do think it's changing. I mean, I still love the job, but probably in the next 2 or 3 years, I'll be looking at kind of coming out of that field. Not that because I don't enjoy it, it's because I know kind of mentally it would have took its toll. And it's about looking after yourself.
Just quickly going back to the mental health then, in terms of the provisions that are available, I imagine have those improved over the years in terms of possibly counselling every so often, allowed to have time off if you're struggling, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, when I first joined, we used to have clinical supervision every 6 months, which, even if you didn't want to talk to me, it was because what I always get frustrated with is that it's not, and certainly with my PTSD, it wasn't actually the job itself, because I've dealt with more serious and more kind of horrific murders. But the fact was, I was under a lot of stress at home. So when I obviously went through it and had counselling after kind of, going through all what was going on in my life, we established that I was basically trying to juggle too many balls at once. So I had a stepson that got ADHD that I talk about in my book that obviously we were struggling with. My son at the time, who was 2, wasn't sleeping. I dealt with a murder a couple of weeks before, so I'd worked long hours. So all that kind of accumulation of kind of stress, and then I went to this. My kind of brain shut off and said, "No, I can't take any more kind of trauma." And so these I found these 6 monthly kind of sitting down with a counsellor, just talking about anything that you wanted to. I felt that relieved the stress because you could kind of vent if there's anything going on in your home life. And then obviously with cuts to the police, they stop that. What they do offer now is obviously they do kind of quite a lot in welfare, well-being, and obviously provide us with numbers of counsellors that we can ring up or other kind of um, medical people that we can speak to if we're suffering. So they are quite supportive. And obviously a lot of it is just talking to each other, our colleagues. That's how we kind of vent really, is just talking to each other and going through jobs with each other and looking after each other really, because just looking out for the signs of anyone that's kind of struggling really.
You talk about stress, and there's a brief section in the book where, and this is a real stressful situation for anyone, where you have to testify in court. What is that like? Because obviously you've done your part, you've got the evidence, you've sorted, and then you got someone who's basically trying to discredit you. That must be very stressful, especially at the start.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get called too often, but very kind of over the last few years, I've been called to kind of quite high profile cases, and one in particular murder case, which I talk about in the book, where it was quite a very experienced barrister from London who was representing the defendant, and yeah, I got kind of grilled in the witness box for probably 2.5 hours, and it never gets any easier. Um, Even though I've given evidence numerous times, you still get that kind of butterfly feeling and nervousness, where you've got 12 jury members looking at you. You've got obviously the defence barristers questioning you, as well as obviously the judge, etc. So it's really daunting. And like I say, even with numerous times going to court, it never gets any easier. And it's quite frustrating when they start to kind of call you a liar as such, where they'll, I'll put it to you that you're incompetent, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that. But you kind of always know when they start with those questions that they haven't really, they kind of haven't got a lot really. If they're not questioning the evidence, they're questioning kind of you as a person really. So, and it's just about keeping calm and just not rising to it. But yeah, it can be really daunting, especially for obviously our newer members that have only recently joined.
You talked about cuts to police force, and you kind of briefly explained how it affects CSI. In what other ways have the cuts affected the line of work you do? Obviously, I've spoken to someone on a podcast about how it's affected the police force as a whole, but specifically in terms of like crime scene investigations. How has it affected your work?
I think the main thing really is obviously the reduction in staff, obviously the fact that they have to, you know, and this isn't the police fault, obviously, that they're given kind of a funding, and their funding is reduced, so they then have to make reductions in the force. So, there's no blame to the police as such, but obviously the reduction in the staff has a massive, and it has done because, back in 2012, there was a big review and they decided to get rid of middle management, of which I was. And there was 10 of us at the time. So they basically kind of disbanded that position. So I lost my management position. So I kind of got demoted. And then I had to reapply for the next kind of best job, really, which was a crime scene coordinator, of which was a new role they'd set up. And kind of had to do a written exam and an interview, and thankfully managed to get that position. But that meant I lost £5,000 and had to work nights as well. So I had to work 24/7 for £5,000 less, and got demoted. And I'd really worked very hard to get where I got within the management role, and that was a real kind of kick in the teeth, really, to be demoted through no fault of my own. But I was just thankful to still have a job, because I've obviously always been the main earner. So it was really important to me to be able to maintain kind of, a decent salary.
Yeah, it's just, I think the whole both police force and your work is just suffering at the moment. So since 2010, basically, since all
Yeah.
this cuts happened, it must be horrendous. Although there was a funny part in the book where, and you talked about burglars wearing gloves before, and you said you were so surprised at the number of people that still get caught because they still have their fingerprints all over the crime scene. You must
Yeah.
look at that and think, God, how stupid must you be?
Yeah, and I think some of them, like, perhaps, drugs are involved where they're not thinking straight and it's just pure desperation. And but yeah, we still do identify a lot of people through fingerprints. But a lot of it is through DNA these days as well, because of how, kind of how technology has moved on.
How did your TV work come about?
So 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I came back after surgery, and the TV company were already filming. So they'd obviously already spoken to staff a few weeks before about, whether they'd like to be filmed and were okay with them kind of following them on jobs. And I was kind of umming and ahhing, really. I wasn't that, interested. And then a job came in, a double murder, and there was no one else to deal with the job. And I was on reduced hours because I was obviously just returning to work after a long period of time off. So I said, "Oh, I'll head down to the scene and just have a look and then hand it over." So I went to the scene, and the TV company turned up, and just said, "Is it okay if we come in and follow you?" And I was kind of put on the spot, really. And I thought, "Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll go with it." And it kind of started from there. And it was really nerve wracking because, having kind of a microphone attached to you and a camera kind of very close to your face and following you, doing your job, it's quite nerve wracking. But after kind of several times of them following me, you just become used to it and kind of forget they're there, really. And then obviously when it got aired in February, I think 3 years ago, the response was just amazing. I had so many messages saying, "Oh my God, you came across really well." And, when I watched it, I was hardly on a pillar, thinking, how am I going to come across? Because obviously I don't get to see it before it's aired. So when the kind of general public are watching it, that's the first time I've seen it as well. So yeah, very nerve wracking, but yeah, I really enjoyed doing it. And in fact, they're coming back in September to carry on filming for another series because it was that popular. And people really enjoy, and I think they enjoy forensics. They enjoy seeing how the crime has been solved. And a lot of people, obviously, because it's in their area, they like it even more because they can relate to it. So yeah, it's been really kind of received well.
Bit of a funny question. Have you been recognised in the street?
I have, yeah. In fact, the most kind of recent was when I was at Birmingham Airport and in Wetherspoons having some breakfast, and next thing I know, like someone standing at the side of my table saying, "Oh my God, are you the girl off the TV?" And I absolutely love your program. And then my daughter was so embarrassed. um, so yeah, I do get recognised quite a lot.
Yeah. It- this is a weird image, but I just imagined you be going to a crime scene and someone recognizing you from like the audience and whatnot, um, and thinking, "Oh yeah, we know that person from the TV and whatnot." Yeah, and then suddenly
Yeah,
after
I had that
doing
very recently actually at a job. I was in my white suit, and yeah, I was approached saying, "Are you the girl off the TV?" And she'd also been discussing it with a friend, and she said, I told you it was her off the TV." So yeah, we were obviously
it.
discussing it and kind of disagreeing that I was or wasn't the girl off the TV. So
Um, in regards to crime scenes themselves, obviously a lot of what you describe in the book is in houses and whatnot. But wasn't there a case where I can't remember which area of the city it was, but a case where you actually went to a crime scene, you actually felt almost threatened because of like the actual area you were in and you while you're trying to do your job.
yeah, it was a shooting that I dealt with in an area that's kind of slightly anti-police. And it was kind of a main road that we'd cordoned off. And unfortunately, when we cordon off a scene, anything within that scene, such as vehicles that are parked, they don't move until kind of I say so, really, until the scene's been dealt with. So this one particular scene, like I say, a young male had been shot dead. The offenders were still outstanding, and there was a lot of angry people because a lot of cars were in the actual cordon of the scene. So I just got there, and obviously, members of the public were coming in. I want my car back. I want my car back. And I was like, well, you kind of have to bear with us because we need to process the scene. We need to photograph the scene, and anything within the cordon can't leave until I make sure that there's no forensic evidence that is going to be lost. So this kind of went on for quite a few hours, and I spent most of my time, rather than dealing with the scene, kind of speaking to the members of the public who were getting really irate at this point. And because I was aware that the offenders of the shooting were still outstanding, and then I had a vehicle that just drove through the police cordon because they weren't happy with what they were being told. Um, when police officers can't stop them, you then become worried because we don't have any personal protection apart from obviously all we wear is our white suits and gloves and masks. We don't have any kind of you know any kind of spray or anything to kind of protect us really. So yeah, that was kind of one scene, and it doesn't happen that often, but that was one particular scene that you do feel a little bit more vulnerable than most. So
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I was actually on my way to work, and I know, like, obviously you can't go into like a cordon, and where I was working was just beyond the cordon, but the police wouldn't let me through.
yeah,
So I wouldn't obviously go that far, but I can understand people's frustrations. But obviously, you have a job to do, and you need to do it, and obviously let the police do their job. Is there a obviously you want to go through it carefully, things and whatnot, but is there like a time limit where you say, okay, we need to get everything wrapped up by this time, otherwise it kind of affects like the quality of the evidence?
yeah. I mean, every scene is different. Obviously your outdoor scenes, you kind of under you really want to get them examined and processed quicker because of obviously the weather and the changes. If it rains, etc. Obviously, you then risk forensic evidence being lost, and also you've got prying eyes, you've got press there, you've got members of the public with their cameras, etc., wanting to record and photograph everything. So your outdoor scenes, you're very much wary of time and kind of trying to process it quicker. Indoor scenes is obviously different because it's not open to the elements. But with regards to evidence, every scene is the same where we are looking for that kind of golden nugget, really, where we go in and we say, okay, we've got this evidence actually where we think this needs to be submitted kind of urgently because this may be able to identify our offender. So we're always looking for that. So we're always processing scenes quickly, as in going in there, examining them, and kind of trying to prioritise what we can actually submit as an urgent submission. But like I say, outdoor scenes, we do tend to process quicker. And kind of getting, where some houses we can have for weeks. It just depends what kind of examination we need to do inside the premises to how long it takes us.
Is that weather dependent as well? Say if it starts to rain very quickly, then for obviously it's going to affect the amount of evidence that you can collect.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have tents and that, which you've probably seen on the TV, where we cover, items that we know, any forensic items that we can see are covered. But yeah, again, and sometimes, with the changes of weather, it changes your kind of forensic strategy, the scene, where you might not have processed that one particular bit of evidence until later on. So, that's why your kind of forensic strategies are quite fluent, really, and you chop and change, and depending on the circumstances. So certainly with weather changing, your forensic strategy changes all the time.
Why did you decide to write the book?
So for years and years, I've always said I need to write a book. I feel that I've had quite a rollercoaster of a life, sort of home life, really, with different things happening. And, every time kind of I'm knocked back down, I'm very much a positive person, glass half full kind of person. So, I can have a day where I feel sorry for myself, but then that's it. 24 hours later, it's like, right, okay, pick yourself back up and crack on. And, some of the stuff that I've dealt with, probably, some people may never have to go through, hopefully never have to go through. So I've always kind of said I really need to write a book, because no one will actually believe that I'm still here, still positive, with all the kind of things that have been thrown my way. So back in February, March last year, I just decided, right, okay, I'm ready to write it. I've got all the things kind of already listed in my head of what I was going to include and what I wanted to kind of get across. So I contacted a ghostwriter that I was recommended in March, and we put together a proposal for publishers in May, June, and straight away I had 5 publishers offered to buy it. So then I spent a couple of days, I then got an agent, and then spent a couple of days in London meeting all the publishers, and then decided who I was going to go with. And then we finished it in December last year. So from March to December it took us. And then it was obviously published on May the 16th this year. So it's been really therapeutic writing it. And one of the main reasons as well, apart from getting across my story, is that, I hope in there that, it can help some people that, may have suffered with PTSD, may have suffered with breast cancer, may have, a child that's got ADHD who is having a really difficult time at school. And it's really to reach out to them and say, actually, I've kind of been through this and I've come out the other side, and it will be okay. And certainly when I spoke and was very honest about my PTSD in the TV programme, I had so many emails from officers that I didn't know that kind of said, thank you so much for taking the stigma away from, mental health. And I actually met up with one gentleman that was off sick at the time, suffering PTSD over something. And we had met up for a walk and had a chat. And at the end of it, after a couple of hours, he said, thank you so much, because I can actually see light at the end of the tunnel now. And just talking to you and seeing you and listening to your journey that you've got through it, and there is hope. I'm actually really positive. And a month later, he went back to work. And, so to me, if I can help one person who reads this book, that's fantastic. So a few reasons really why I wrote the book. And it's a bit surreal, really, because, it's always been my dream. But as my best friend said, whenever I say I'm going to do something, I'll make sure I do it. I don't just say that I'm going to do something, I always make sure I do it. So, yeah, dream come true.
Okay, cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this book. It was it didn't take me long. I'm not the fastest reader in the world, but it didn't take me long because I was so compelled by it. If people want to buy this book, or if people want to know more about your work, where can I go to?
So it's obviously on Amazon. So Every Contact Leaves a Trace by Joe Ward or Waterstones. But certainly, if you put me on Google, you'll obviously see kind of my profile on there, and all about the work. Also, the TV program is still on BBC iPlayer. Forensics, the Real CSI. And there's a couple of series on there that you can catch up on.
And you're saying that series comes back, is it the start filming again in September? Is that correct?
They start filming again in September, but I think there's another kind of series coming out in February next year.
So yeah, so you said about Amazon, so about Waterstones as well. Are you going to do more any book events as well?
Yeah, I've got another I'm getting into been invited to a couple of book events with just local kind of book clubs really. So I've kind of been invited as a guest with them. So and then hopefully a few more festivals next year if I can get them arranged. Because I recently did Lichfield Festival, which was a real success. There was about 120 people there, which was really good. And they just find it really interesting because there's a lot of questions and answers at the end, and just gives people an opportunity to kind of meet me and ask me questions that they've always wanted to ask. So
Well, just quickly, would you ever write a follow-up to this book?
I'd love to. I mean, the reviews on Amazon are just fantastic. Really all very positive, and all asking the same thing. When's the next book coming out? Because they enjoyed it that much. So yeah, that'll be discussion with the publishers. And I mean, I've certainly got another book in me. Certainly got a lot more stories to tell. So yeah, so watch your space. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Well, Joe Ward, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the 286 project. Thanks you for coming along.
Thank you so much. Lovely to speak to you.
Right.